So with that, let me open it up to you. Don't hesitate to ask some questions here. If you have a question, that means that we probably are being kept awake at night by the same question. But before I open it up, I want to invite Dan Medeiros to come up to the panel and join the panel. Dan was the visionary behind not only the Laurel Curve project, but the Rocks Ranch project. And he worked tirelessly to get these projects done over his 14 years at the Land Trust. And through that work has become an expert in connectivity in his own right. And so I'm glad that Dan was able to be here tonight. And the first hand I saw was Dobie.
Dan, what are the properties on the west side of 101 that are adjacent and important?
Yeah, so I'm thinking west, so not on the adjacent to Rocks Ranch, but not across the highway.
Toward Granite Rock.
Towards Granite Rock? Yeah, I mean, that's from my perspective, the whole reason that linkage exists is because the Granite Rock Corporation has kept housing out of that landscape. So they've, for out of their own self-interest, they didn't want conflicts with neighbors, so that the fact that mine has been in operation for I think nearly 100 years has really kept that rural residential development down, which has allowed any hope of a linkage. So yeah, I mean a partnership with Granite Rock is really what's going to be key to facilitating permanent conservation in that landscape.
And their response has been?
Well, I don't want to speak for them. They're right here. Rachel's hiding, but they've been really great partners. Chris mentioned earlier that the Bobcat study. There we go. Okay, sorry about that. So the Bobcat study wouldn't have happened without Granite Rock's participation. So they actually allowed us to collar cats on their property, which as a mining corporation who's heavily they operate a mine in the most heavily regulated place on earth to operate a mine. That's quite a leap of faith to invite the environmental community in to monitor and get new science done. So a lot remains to be worked out, but I'm hopeful.
Well, there's questions. Don't hesitate. Yeah, Brian.
Yes, it's terrific to see this is happening. Kind of amazing. I'm wondering what kind of fencing or whatever methods you're going to use to direct the animals to the crossings.
It's a crisp
So
question.
how tall do they need to be so deer don't jump over them, or even mountain lions? How long do they have to be? And so
Well, so there's actually wildlife crossing structures are fairly new to California. I think the Laurel Curve one was probably not the first one to be built, but the first one to get funded and permitted in our state. And but this is pretty settled science throughout most of the West. So there's this amazing researcher we worked with at Laurel Curve named Tony Clevenger, who is an expert on all of those directional fencing and structuring. And so the Laurel Curve crossing was very specifically built and involved Tony to make sure using the best available science so that it would work. And so we, Caltrans has hired Tony to advise in terms of linkage. He also participated in some of the science and development priorities for that region. So yeah, I think deer fence needs to be like 8 feet tall, and you try to use all the the right type of fence that's not dangerous to wildlife to funnel them into the crossing structure.
Hi, everyone. They also have to go, the fencing has to go at least 2 feet underground, because badgers are really good diggers, so are coyotes. So like, when you have a crossing structure and the fencing, which is like preferably 10 feet high, especially if you have tule elk in the area, because they'll just walk through fences. So the fencing needs to go down so that nothing can dig under as well, and it has to be really tiny, square, what we call square fencing, because it's easy to climb any other type of fence. And if it's too big, then weasels can get through, other small mammals can get through. So that was a really good question. Just wanted to add that in.
So I have a question.
Yeah, so the question was, what's their second favorite food? So deer are about 95% of their calories. And then after that, depends whether you're talking about calories or number, but by number, they kill raccoons and domestic cats would be the sort of next highest number. But in terms of the calories they get from that, it's like probably less than 1%.
One more? What was that?
Yeah. Did I hear you correctly saying that there's 60 mountain lions in the Santa Cruz Mountains? Is that the number? I guess the question, though, more is, what is the projection of preserved mountain lions with having these crossings? In other words, what is going to change in terms of the population growth?
Yeah, I don't think it'll affect the population size very much. I think what it'll affect is the population health. So
Population health.
yeah, so without the crossings, I think we'll eventually lose mountain lions in the Santa Cruz Mountains because the effects of inbreeding will become so bad, over say 100 years or something, that we'll just eventually lose mountain lions.
So the
entirely.
mountain lions will become extinct in this area.
Yeah.
These crossings are not
That's right.
installed.
Jamie?
Yeah, I'm curious if there are any potential anticipated consequences that could be associated with the crossing. I guess I'm thinking back to a study I remember from grad school about Banff. I think it was where like predators were like birding prey into barriers.
Yeah, so canids, like, yeah, so the question is unanticipated impacts of these crossing structures. And so canids, wolves, coyotes will often use fences to chase their prey into the fence and then, kill them either just by the impact of the fence or just ability to catch up to them. So, that is entirely possible, but when you think of the amount of fencing you'd need for one of these highways versus the amount of fencing that's just in the Santa Cruz Mountains already, it'd be quite small. There are other things you worry about when you connect an area, like that it would allow invasive species to come in or something like that, but just in the context of this eco region, I don't see that as being too much of a fear.
Jamie, there are two animals. I have a loud voice. I'm probably louder than that thing. There are two animals though that sit there and they wait for prey. Can you guess what they are? Number one is a domestic cat. They just sit there like it's wild. Like, so when we put up camera stations, we'll just put it on video because we want to see that behavior. I want to know. I don't want to know what's crossing. I want to know how they're crossing. Like, do they hesitate? Are they scared? Do they, what do they do? So cats will sit there and they'll wait for ground squirrels, mice, or anything to cross by, and sometimes they even have a litter in the culvert because it's actually cool and quiet. The other species is kind of cool. It has like what I call face paint. It's about this big. It's a long-tailed weasel. So if you look at the images we got from, the videos we got from the Southern Santa Cruz study, which is like 129, 101, that whole Gatlin area, and 152, across all highways around those culverts, the long-tailed weasels would just sit outside a culvert and they would wait for brush rabbits to come out or go in, and they'd kill them. It was wild. There's only two species that we've got that actually do that.
Yes.
Have you had any encounters with bears? Because I know that the bears are down south and stuff.
So the question is, are there any bears? So I do have a project in the Salinas River, but we were wondering at the southern extent of the southern Santa Cruz Mountains. So like if you take 101, you pass Rocks Ranch, you go south, it turns into Monterey County. This is the wildest thing. Sometimes I'm like, I don't even think I should say it. So my partner and I, we come across this track, and it's in a culvert. These last two culverts, about 6 miles from Rocks Ranch, and it's down. And the first one I see, I'm like, oh, okay, that's a beaver. It was a beaver track because culverts have water. It made sense. Then there's another one, and I'm like, that's not right. It had so bears. Like we had this story. So like in my culture, so it's a Navajo story. I'll tell it real quick so it can help you out with tracking. So it says this: when the Great Spirit created wildlife, the bear, he called all the wildlife to get their moccasins. The bear was late. He was lazy. Okay, so he gets up and he's in a stupor, and he puts his shoes on backwards. So when you see a bear track, it looks like a puma, pumas have 5 toes. You remove this toe, it's up here. They have 4. You count the highest toe, you go down, that's the right track. Left, same thing, down, okay? Bears, they have 5, but it's flipped like this. So if you look at it, and I saw that, I was like, it was in a culvert, and I'm like, this can't be true. Like, this is not a black bear track. Here. We sent it to a master tracker, and he's like, and I just said, hey, what is this track? That's a bear track. And I'm like, no. Like, it can't be, you know? So that was the only thing that we got. Yeah. Unless you go to my backyard where I have bears.
We have bears.
I have a question. Years ago, I actually went on my mountain bike through that area. Are they, one, is there still a trail through there? And 2, if there is, are they going to discourage people from either riding or hiking through there?
Where the
South Laurel Curve. Years ago. I just didn't know if it was still in existence.
So is there, so you had ridden a trail several years ago through the Laurel Curve area.
Right.
Yes, so there is no, so as far as I know, the history is that all those properties have been private along the highway. Maybe there had been like some local community trails. I mean, the best mountain biking trails in Santa Cruz County are all illegal on campus, so, you know, that wouldn't surprise me. But, you know, interestingly enough, we originally thought there might be a railroad tunnel there because the old railroad tunnel to San Jose crosses through that same area. Of course, it's like 100 feet underground. But as far as we know, there's been no human crossing across the Laurel Curve right there.
On this chart, how long were these taken for and when?
I think that was the first 3 years. Yeah. And the reason we picked that, so the question was for the map and how long the duration of time the roadkill was for. And that was like, I think the beginning of the study. And the reason we picked that was because in just that short amount of time, we have to assume that probably the same thing was happening before we started the study. But since then, it's just, I mean, like, it's tripled. It's just grown astronomically. So
Tanya, Higa's partner, Tanya and Higa and I designed the research project, and we actually studied all of Highway 17, all the way to Lexington Reservoir, and tried to collect that similar data, because we actually, the truth is, we had this real estate opportunity before the project, and it was, are we going to go spend this money, and is this the right thing to do? And so we were, it was a very stressful situation because it was an active escrow, so we quickly tried to get as much of this collision data as we could. And what Tanya and Higa found was that at least 50% of all the animal collisions on Highway 17 were at the Laurel Curve site, and that was shocking to me. So it was just like very fortuitous that the deal lined up with the research we found.
And it's more when you compare it to different highways too. So like Highway 101, like if you've heard of the Coyote Valley area, it's another big topic area. So Highway 17 has more. Highway 152, where Tulielp is crossing, and we're picking up Tulielp roadkill, still has more. Okay. If you go to Yakima, so like you take 101 north and you go to Sonoma, still Highway 17 has more. Highway 1, all the Highway 280, so all of them don't have as many Puma roadkill points as Laurel Curve. Just that area, not all of 17.
Yeah, and that's really a function of the geography too. And so the Laurel Curve before historically was the most dangerous section of Highway 17. It's just that steep curve, and it's kind of like a reverse bank, and so there was quite a few fatalities there. So in 2008, they actually created these concrete median barriers to keep traffic from falling across the highway and getting into head-on collisions. So that massively increased the roadkill problem. So it was a really big ask when we started this project to go to Caltrans to say, hey, could you rip up the thing you just built for several $1 billion that took a year to get permitted, to years and years to get permitted and then redo it. So it was a real uphill battle, but it really was this data that made the case.
What's their average lifespan and what are they capable of living to?
I'm a guess.
Yes?
Yeah, That's a tough question. Hard to answer.
Well, for the Santa Cruz Mountains, I know it's different in different ranges.
Yeah, average lifespan we haven't actually calculated, but I guess it's like 3 or 4 years. You know, in terms of how old they're capable of getting. I think our oldest animal is probably like 11, maybe 12.
Did you see any change in behavior after the Xenia fire?
Yeah, good question. The question was, did we see a change in behavior after the CZU fires? Hard to say. We didn't really have. We had 1 or 2 animals that were only partially using the CZU area, so we didn't have a good window on what happened there.
Yeah, Seven Center Redwoods, where I think it was like the hottest point. I don't know if you've ever been there. The Rancho Santa Cruz is a partial owner, and it should be open. I think they're it's kind of open, but yeah. But anyway, so I'm just like. I have like my main projects, and then I have like the side projects where they're like, hey, can you just go check those cameras for us? I'm like, sure. And San Francisco Redwoods is wild. Like it's the first time I went there, like you're walking through like a foot of leaflet or tan oak and drone leaves and all that stuff. And after the fire, it was like you would see pumas. Like there's this section that's called Dead Man's Gulch. I don't know if you heard about that. And I'm like, well, that's gonna be a fun hike. So like it's a gulch, and they said, oh, you set up a road camera. So you walk up, and it's all the way at the top. You set up the camera. It's really far out there, and I get a picture of this humongous male mountain lion, and his face is all scratched up. And I was like I do not want to run into that guy, you know. But that place, it was canopy. It was like cool, shadowy. Now it has completely sprouted up. We have not gotten a mountain lion in any of those surrounding conversations since then. Yeah, so they all just kind of like failed. But then again, that was the hottest spot of the fire.
What happened to his face?
I think he got in a fight, right? Like, I don't know if he won or lost, but yeah.
There was a question.
Yeah.
Are the males always moving, or do they ever make it down and sit? You know, to hang out somewhere for a while?
Yeah, the males are constantly on the move. I mean, they'll even, kill a big deer, and if a female kills a deer, either she or her cubs will eat every last, piece of meat on it. But a male might even just feed once or twice and then just keep moving. So they're busy. They're patrolling their territory, keeping other males out, and looking for females in heat.
And the females, do they settle down in one area just when they're going to have cubs and raising the cubs, or do they always kind of stick in one area?
Yeah, so when they don't have cubs, young cubs, they're sort of moving around their home range. And then when they have a litter, they'll localize, and they'll have what we call a nursery. It's not a den because they don't dig a hole. It's usually like in a redwood family circle or under a log or something. They'll just sort of stash their kittens. And then while the kittens are in the nursery, they'll just sort of go out, make a kill, come back, go out, make a kill, come back. Or like make a kill and then just go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And then at like maybe 6 weeks, then they'll start taking the kittens to the kill. So they'll make a kill, come back, get the kittens from the previous kill, move them to the new kill, leave them there, go make another kill, come back to the previous kill, so on and so forth.
Ron?
So it's clear that Laurel Curve is a bottleneck, but what's happening, have we looked about what's happening beyond that bottleneck? Is there a need to protect or preserve other properties that are further out that feed into that Laurel Curve bottleneck? That might be a question for you.
Yes.
Yes.
So the Laurel Curve Curve project is really about connectivity within the Santa Cruz Mountains. And beyond the properties that are directly adjacent to the highway, the Land Trust has worked really hard to protect several properties both to the east and west. So we are actually one property away from completely integrated linkage to public land on either side of the highway. So the bigger, more regional challenge really is Highway 101 in my perspective. And so, this is really the focus of the Rocks Ranch work. And it's just to touch on that for a minute. It's so amazing to me that Caltrans has made that an official project, because to get that done for Laurel Curve took a lot of people beyond the land trust in Sacramento to make a lot of noise to make that happen. And so they actually did this voluntarily and from their own staff, who are the veterans of the Laurel Curve project. So it's really kind of built that momentum, and now there's more money than ever to kind of make these projects happen. So I think if the land can be secured, it really is that crossing will actually get built.
I read recently that there was a bill to mandate like a dozen wildlife crossings in California each year. Are you aware of this?
Yeah, so that's a funding measure. It's not a requirement.
Okay.
So they can prioritize. There's a statewide prioritization plan for wildlife linkages. The Laurel Curve linkage, the Gavilon linkage, is in the top tier of priorities, and so it's basically the funding, the public funding is there in a way that's never been before, and it all comes down as the real estate guy to willing landowners, right, and making a deal. So it's the infrastructure funding, I think, is going to be much more doable this time around.
Chris, in your studies of the impact on mountain lions, did you study highway noise, cars? You studied human voice, and you studied other things.
Yeah, I haven't looked at highway noise yet.
The good news is that when you're in a culvert, it's pretty quiet. It's really quiet. Like it's like it's almost like the loudest part is actually at the openings, which is really cool. It's really eerie. It's like I have a video. And it's a bobcat in a culvert. It's 104 degrees, and the bobcat goes in the culvert, and it's just laying around like playing, and like there's birds chirping and flying around, and it's just like so comfortable there. It's a really cool spot to hang out. If you're an animal.
Noise is something that they do consider when they do crossing structures, particularly with bridges. They bring in sound consultants to think about the noise environment and how to minimize the traffic noise.
Can you all tell us a little bit about how wildlife know how to get to the tunnel?
Yeah, great question. I mean, you're going to have, two kinds of individuals roughly using the tunnel. You're going to have individuals whose home ranges bump up against 17, and they're just going to know that that's where you cross 17, and they may do it habitually. And then you'll have animals that are, young animals dispersing, looking for a home range of their own, and they happen upon the 17 tunnel and they cross it. Now, how do they happen upon it? Well, that's why the data on mountain lions was so important, is that it just should show it was there. Why is it there? Well, because the landscape is kind of naturally leading them there because of the topography and how the human-built landscape is situated on landscape.
Yeah, the Laurel Curve site has the least developed portion of Highway 17 and has the largest parcels relative to the surrounding landscape. So, I mean, outside of the the actual habitat that's there, that would be they would be less human interaction.
Is it undeveloped because it's steep?
No, it's just these kind of historic, large, privately held properties. And it's a lot of them are, especially on the east side of Highway 17, are pretty rugged along Laurel Road. So there's not been a lot of development pressure there. Well, that was one of the things that was super concerning. Was with one of the properties there was a developer involved, and they were I don't know if they would have gotten away with it, but there's plans to put up to 10 homes there.
I have one other question. I'm not sure, couldn't quite hear if it was answered before, but is this avenue underneath Laurel Curve going to be a major point of predation? Because if I was a puma, I thought, that's where all the deer are, I'd say, I'm hanging out there.
Yeah, so like I said earlier, it was a little bit different. Like a lot of people ask, like, hey, do predators hang out at these structures because they know that there's a lot of funnel? And here's like the most, like here's the answer that's kind of shocking. So when you have these structures that are funneling, like Sarah said, that one of the questions was, how do they know that these culverts are there? Well, when you're tracking, first thing is look for water. You'll find tracks. Look for ravines. You'll find them. Every culvert has a ravine leading to it. Every culvert has water leading to it. Somehow, at some point in time, there's some type of topographical feature that just guides wildlife there. And there are these huge, like, just highways. We call them wildlife highways. Well, the problem is, if you have a mountain lion waiting there, right, and a badger comes through, what happens? Well, there's a potential conflict, right? So what you have is well, if another mountain lion comes through, then you have a fight, which actually does happen when the territories are that close. So typically, the mountain lion behavior that we've gotten on camera around these structures, they're in and out. Mountain lions, they actually go really quickly through them, or they don't go through at all, they'll go halfway and come out. Bears are different. Bears will just stay there. Obviously, like, I'm sure you guys saw my viral video of a badger and coyote, right? Like, that was actually, yeah. So that was actually, thank you. That was part of the Southern Santa Cruz Mountain study. The wild thing is that there's badger burrows all over the hillside, and there's coyotes all along that area. So when they came across each other, it's like, well, it makes sense. They're all being led there, right? But like, yeah, we've gotten skunk fights with opossums. We've got bobcats and opossums, and it's a conflict. So wildlife want to reduce the risk of conflict at all costs. So they're in and out.
I've seen that video. Can you explain that? What was really going on with the badger and the coyote?
Yeah. So the question was about the badger and coyote video. So yeah, we were fresh off our badger study we had on Highway 35, Skyline, and this particular area was on Highway 152. So if you're traveling 152 east toward Casa de Fruta, there's this round 4-foot culvert, and all culverts kind of go to one side or the other. When I went there, on the hillsides you could see the throws, we call them bibs, and I'm like, that's badger sign. So I'm like, I gotta set this camera to video. I want to see how they're acting. Check the camera, and there's a badger. And he looks up, and he's pretty big male, and he's looking at the culvert, and then he goes south. So he goes to the culvert. 5 minutes later, he's like running, like you see him, like they're pigeon-toed. He runs through, and as he's coming through, there's 2 eyes following him. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's another badger. It was a coyote. So the coyote comes through. What they didn't release was there's like 5 other videos, and the badger and the coyote are in front of the culvert, and the badger's just like looking around, and the coyote's just following him, and then they're both male, and like they split, and they're checking out the hills because there's a lot of ground squirrels. There's a lot of ground squirrels, so it's really good hunting. And typically badgers and coyote hunt together, but the thing is that, or not, it's not like half the day, but like, they'll occasionally hunt together. But the thing about this is they were actually traveling. So what you see the badger like move around, and then the coyote's like, okay, I want to go back that way, but the badger's like staying over here. So it jumps like a dog would, and it wags its tail, and the badger follows it, and they go back, to hunt. And then we actually got it like, again, the same, I don't know if it's the same individuals, but we got a badger and coyote again last month. So it's just a good area for those 2 species.
Why do you think that they were hanging out together?
Well,
the advantage.
So badgers are really, so what badgers will do is they'll dig a burrow, and they'll get voles, gophers, ground squirrels, whatever they can find, and they're really good at it because they're used to digging burrows and then exiting out. Whereas ground squirrels, they panic, and they'll try to go to their different entry points, but they'll just panic like a squirrel in the road, and the badger will go in, and as the other ground squirrels, it'll zone in on like one, and as the family exits, the coyote will be up top and will get as many as they can. So they call it reciprocal, but it's like, well, some people say like coyote using the badger, but it's like, well, any animal that goes up that goes up and meets the coyote, it's going to try to evade the coyote, so maybe the badger can get it. So it's it's a good hunting technique for two different species, which is pretty wild.